My name is Brett Smiley. I'm a Democratic candidate for mayor in Providence, and right now I'm a full-time candidate for mayor. Most recently, I was the state's director of administration. Like more and more people, I actually chose Providence. I didn't grow up here. I moved here for work in 2006. I like to joke that I moved here for a 9-month job 16 years ago, and I ended up meeting and subsequently marrying a Rhode Islander, and Rhode Island became home. Providence is a really special city, and I think sometimes people who maybe haven't lived or worked elsewhere don't fully appreciate how special this place is. The arts and culture in our city are second to none. The diversity and the richness of our neighborhoods, it makes it really unique and special. And you know, we are in the heart of it all, halfway in between New York and Boston. There is so much potential for Providence. And that's really why I want to be mayor, is to help the city reach that potential, because the raw ingredients are all here. And sometimes it's our inability to get some of the basic things right that I think that's holding us back. Everything from basic city services to improvements to our public schools and to making sure that it's a safe and clean city. You know, in Providence, we have had a lot of success in the past with community policing. Unfortunately, we've fallen away from that. And so, you know, in the midst of, you know, all of the very valid and just protests around the country, we've had a re-examination of what does law enforcement in Providence really need to be. And so I recognize that there's a lot of people in Providence that don't feel safer when they see a police officer. But there will always and must be a role for policing in our community. And so I'm focused on how do we repair that relationship, how do we improve policing in Providence, and I think the way we do that is through community policing. So community policing to me means officers who are from Providence, who are reflect the diversity of the community, who are multilingual, and who are assigned to the neighborhoods for extended periods of time so that neighbors can actually get to know their neighborhood police officer, where they're walking the beat, riding their bicycles, out of their cruisers and into the community, so that people can actually start to build a relationship of trust between the police, as opposed to their only interaction with the police is when they're responding to a crime after the fact in very tense and sometimes difficult situations. And so I think that we can have better policing, more respectful policing, policing that you know, that it is accountable to the community through community policing. And we've done it once before as a city, and I know we can do it again. It's not just the mayor, but it's the team that he or she builds. And when you're surrounded by people who have different lived experience, different professional experience, you know, that live in Providence and relate to the city in different ways, I think that's how you make really good decisions, and I think that's how you make sure that the policies and objectives of coming out of City Hall are relevant to everybody in Providence. So it starts with the real basics. I mean, everything from snow removal, which in the winter, sometimes it feels like when they're plowing, it's the first time it's ever snowed. And it's like, you guys do this every year, surely we can do better. To fixing potholes, sidewalks that never get repaired. I mean, these are the things that only city government is responsible for. And so I've got a real focus on these basic quality of life, city service issues that I know we can fix. And that's my first priority. We just talked about the complications around policing in the city, and we need to do better. And then finally, in our school system. The state's taken over our schools. I expect we'll talk about that a little bit, but we need to make progress in educational opportunities for students. The state runs our school system right now. There's at least two more years of state oversight, and so my job as mayor will be to work with whoever the next governor is to make sure that the city and the voices of parents and students are in that conversation while the state's still in charge. In the meantime, there's some things that the city is responsible for. We're still responsible for the school buildings. We know that many of the buildings are inadequate, outdated, and in some cases unsafe. And so I've got a plan to rebuild or renovate nearly every school building in Providence, and plan to do so in an equitable fashion to make sure that every neighborhood gets a new or freshly renovated school. I mean, you guys are the future, and you probably hear that a lot, but we need to do a much better job preparing students in Providence for either college or career. I think the idea that a 4-year college degree is what everyone has to do is not true, and certainly not like it used to be. But it is true that every student needs to have something more than a high school diploma. in order to make it in the world and to be able to raise a family and buy a house. And so we need to be offering more programs and I think more pathways for students, if it's not college, to degree or certificate programs so that you can learn a skill or a trade. And so I'm really interested in our high schools, in our public high schools, making sure that we've got more career and technical training, that we've got more career pathways, so that if four-year college isn't for you, that you're leaving with a skill or a credential that no one can take away from you. And you may change your mind later in life and decide, I don't want to be an electrician anymore, I don't want to be a computer programmer anymore. But so long as you want to keep doing that, you've got something tangible that no one can take away from you that provides employment opportunities and career opportunities going forward. And I think that is so important that we support our students with something real that can support a job upon graduation. And I don't think that's happening for most of our students right now. Inflation's a real problem, and for families, you asked earlier about poor families in Providence. It hurts poor people and low-income people worse than others. And thankfully, gas prices are coming back down again, but cost of food and other basic necessities have remained high. There's not much the city can do about inflation itself. It's really driven by global economic changes and challenges, but it does mean that we need to provide extra help and support to those who are struggling to pay their bills every month. And so what I'm interested in is, how do we make childcare more affordable? How do we make the cost of rent more affordable? How do we make sure that if you're not a driver, that there's free bus service on RIPTA, things that can make a meaningful difference in a family's budget, particularly families that are struggling every month because of these other costs. There's not much the city can do about gas prices or cost of food, but we can help with some of these other things to make the total household budget a little bit more affordable and easy to swallow. Income inequality is a major issue in our city, and the single largest problem is our housing crisis. Right now, the cost of housing, both rental and home ownership opportunities, is out of reach for most families. The only thing that's been built in Providence in recent years are studio apartments for college kids whose parents are paying the rent. And we're not doing anything to actually create new homes for families in Providence. And so I think the most important concrete thing we can do is to dramatically develop new housing opportunities, both home ownership opportunities and rental opportunities that families can actually live in. 2- and 3-bedroom apartments or 2- and 3-bedroom homes that families can actually buy, and to do so in a way that is also addressing the vacant and abandoned buildings in our community, to both make the neighborhoods safer and cleaner and healthier, but also by creating new housing opportunities. And that's the single most important thing that we can do to help those who are low-income residents of our city. So the car registration fees and insurance rates are largely set by the state, but we do have a role to play in making sure that people can get to work, to either get to school. And so I would work with state leaders to consider something like a 2-tier registration fee process for younger, or maybe younger and older folks, people in retirement as well would struggle with these fees. And unfortunately, the insurance rates in Rhode Island are much higher than neighboring states. And there's not a whole lot that city government can do about this. But part of the solution is not just making cars more affordable, but to make sure that people understand there's alternatives to car ownership. So that means a real public transportation system that works, better RIPTA service, making biking and other forms of transportation more accessible, so maybe you don't have to have a car at all. So on bicycles, real cities have bike lanes, and I do think we should be trying to encourage more people to drive less. And so we need to continue to have sensible bike lane policies, and we need to make it easier for people to get around, get to work, get to school by ways other than cars. And so that's something that we should continue to work on as a city, but we need to do it in a way that is flexible and respectful. The city has added some bike lanes in some places that neighbors and business owners have strongly objected to, and the city's been unwilling to make any changes. The changes on Broad Street recently, a lot of those business owners didn't feel like they were adequately communicated with. They lost parking spaces. It's been a real burden on their businesses. And so the city has to listen and be willing to make changes before they make permanent changes like that. The motorcycles and the ATVs, really the dirt bikes and the ATVs, are a real problem in the city. And it's a top complaint that I hear from residents in every neighborhood. It's not just one neighborhood or another. And so I think we need to send a new message that kind of behavior is not welcome in Providence. They're illegal. They're illegal on all city streets. They're not legal for street use. And some of the riders have asked for a space to ride off-road, and I'm very open to trying to help them find a space to do that. But riding on city streets is unsafe and against the law. And so I hope that we don't have to arrest anybody, and I certainly don't want to see anyone get hurt. But we do need to send a new message that kind of activity is unsafe and unwelcome in Providence. You know, we're lucky in Providence that it's a city that values diversity, and in many cases the state and local laws are actually pretty good for anti-discrimination and other purposes. What I think we need to focus on now are the still most vulnerable members of the LGBT community, of my community, which is largely trans folks, queer youth. There's still a disproportionate number of homeless LGBTQ folks and young people in particular. And so there are important community partners who are trying to address these problems. I intend to continue to support them, make sure that city government is making funding available to care for the most vulnerable within our community, and to make sure that in our school system that queer youth are protected and kept safe, but also given a voice and given a platform to advocate for themselves, to have some say in future policy making decisions, and to make sure that community is lifted up to be the next generation of leaders. I fought for marriage equality here in Rhode Island. I'm a gay man and was very active in that effort when we passed it. I was on the board of Planned Parenthood for many years, fighting for women's reproductive health. I actually just finished my board service there. And I've been an active member. I'm a person in long-term recovery from alcoholism, and I've been very active in the addiction recovery community here in Providence, helping make sure that resources are available and to address the drug epidemic and the overdose crisis here in Rhode Island. So I've worked really hard to build real relationships, not just over this campaign, but over the last decade in Providence, to make sure that that I've got real, genuine, authentic relationships with all the communities in Providence. But I also am very cognizant of the fact that the largest group of residents in Providence are Latino, and so I spend a lot of intentional time in cultivating those relationships. I'm proud of the campaign staff that I have, which includes members of the Latino community. A majority of my staff are people of color, and nearly half of them are bilingual. Myself, I've been studying Spanish, and I have a tutor that comes to my house once a week as well, because I didn't grow up bilingual, but know that in order to be a good mayor, and because I want to be able to communicate with everybody in Providence.
What happened in Providence last weekend was very surprising to everybody with the flooding. How will you address this issue for the city infrastructure?
The storm that we saw last week, we're going to see more and more of those kind of storms. Climate change is real, and it's going to affect Providence worse than other communities around the city, around the country. We need to be ready for these kind of storms to be the new normal. And so we saw damage across the city from our existing infrastructure, but we also saw infrastructure that wasn't prepared to handle 7 inches of rain in 3 hours. And so first, on the existing infrastructure, things like the patches that you see when there's been road work, for years we know that that's been done poorly, and it all washes away in a big storm. And so we need to hold our utility companies and our vendors accountable to do the job that we've paid them to do, to make sure that these major weather events don't undermine the poor quality work. But then going forward, we need to do a lot more to adapt our infrastructure to be resilient in the face of climate change. So that's everything from bigger storm drains to what they call bioswales, which are not hard infrastructure but soft infrastructure, which is grass and gravel areas that can catch some of the rainwater so that it's not all getting pumped into our sewer treatment facilities. We need to make sure that when we build new buildings, that resiliency needs to be incorporated into the building plans. I think, honestly, when we build downtown, we're going to have to start thinking about leaving the first floor to be space that could potentially be flooded, because that's what's coming our way because of the global inaction around climate change. We're not going to be immune from the effects here in Providence, and so resiliency needs to be incorporated into all of our design. The infrastructure needs to be adapted, and we need to think about much more aggressive and swift action to get ready for what's happening more and more frequent.
Do you have any other political aspirations other than mayor?
No, believe it or not, I don't. So, I ran for mayor 8 years ago and ended up withdrawing to support the current mayor, Jorge Elorza. And then now that he's term limited, I'm running again. This is actually the only office I've ever considered running for. And it's because, first of all, I care deeply about Providence, but I also think that I could do this job very well. There was a long time, I've been around politics for a long time, and there was a woman who I met with 25 years ago when I was working for a different candidate for office. And she said to my boss at the time, she said, there's two kinds of people who run for office. There's the kind of people who want to be someone, and the kind of people who want to do something. Which kind are you? And I've never forgotten that advice. And I'm not running for office because I want to see my name on a yard sign. I'm running for office because I want to do something. And what I want to do are these things here in Providence that we've been talking about. This is a Democratic primary, and there's 3 candidates, and in many cases we have very similar policies and positions. We have a lot of these candidate forums, and if you listen to all 3 of us, it sounds pretty similar. I think the difference for voters and for people to try to decide is priorities and experience. Because we can have the same positions on everything, but you can't do everything. You have to prioritize. And so my priorities are basic city services, public safety, and public schools. Those are my priorities. I've been clear about that from the beginning. And my experience is very different than the other candidates running this year. As the governor's chief of staff, the state's director of administration, the city's first chief operating officer, I'm the only candidate running for mayor this year who's ever managed people or budgets at this scale. I'm the only candidate who's ever negotiated a labor union agreement, which is a big part of the job. I'm the only candidate who's already managed city operations once before. I've had a chance to see what works and what doesn't work and what needs to be fixed. And I think that makes a big difference. I think my experience is absolutely an advantage, and I'm proud of it because it wasn't handed to me. I worked really hard for those jobs, and being the mayor of Providence, it's not like some other political jobs. You're actually running the city. We have 4,000 employees, the budget's $500 million, and you're responsible for running this large organization. And so I think that voters should take that into account when they decide who to vote for. I think having relevant experience, having management experience makes a big difference in what kind of mayor you can be. And so I hope that my experience is persuasive to the voters, and I'm really proud of it. I spent the last decade in some really difficult jobs that I worked really hard to get and really hard to do a good job at, and I think it's been good training for hopefully my next job, which I hope will be as mayor of Providence. I don't know what my next step would be. For the last year and a half, I've been campaigning full-time for mayor, and this is what I'm entirely focused on. So I don't currently have a plan B. But if I don't get elected on Tuesday, I'm not going anywhere, and I will find a new way to stay involved in Providence and a new way to make a difference in my city.